61 years ago, 1957, China started the first ever Import-Export Expo in Guangdong, also known as the Canton Fair. Over the past 40 years of China's reform and opening up, that has become a platform to show to the rest of the world what China can offer when it comes to goods and exports. 61 years later, China has also started the brand new platform, which is the Import Expo. It is a determination coming from China to embrace the global trade and also showcase the capabilities of the Chinese purchasing power.
中国国际进口博览会是迄今为止世界上第一个
The CIIE is the first import expo held at the national level. This is indeed an innovation in the history of global trade. This is an important decision made by China to pursue a new level of opening up. This is also China's major initiative to still widen its market access for the rest of the world. Chinese economy is not a pond, but an ocean. The ocean may have its calm days, but big winds and storms are only to be expected. Without them, the ocean wouldn't be what it is. Big winds and storms may upset a pond, but never an ocean. It is the same for China. After going through 5,000 years of trials and tribulations, China is still here.
Those are the important quotes coming from Chinese President Xi Jinping at the opening ceremony of CIIE, the first ever China Import Expo. Before the opening ceremony, I talked to Jim Yong Kim, the president of the World Bank, about his thoughts on the global trade and why it matters to the rest of the world, including to an international organization like the World Bank.
Now, you know, there's an import expo that's happening in Shanghai on Monday, and the message is that we're open for business. We want more imports. We want to help you sell your products in China. China is one of the most important markets already for so many different countries. I think that's a good first step. But you know, China is still a developing country, and it keeps pointing that out. It's still only 25% of the average OECD GDP per capita. And so there's going to be some adjustments that need to be made. And I think making sure that there are talks, utilizing organizations like the World Trade Organization, this is really important. Now, again, I think that more trade is so much in the economic interests of every country in the world that we will get there. And so I look at these skirmishes right now as temporary. Over time, we're going to move to finding ways of increasing trade in a way that everyone feels like their voices have been heard and that the system is more fair.
But what kind of trade? Many people also ask. Is it going to be just a bilateral trade? Is it going to be very small-scale regional trade? Or it will be much more about multilateral trade, and whatever form is the best to serve the economies involved?
Well, we think that the role of the World Trade Organization has been critically important. We're, of course, multilateral institutions ourselves, so we believe in multilateralism. And we believe that the multilateral trade agreements have made a huge contribution to the overall growth of the global economy. But, you know, there are people who are criticizing the WTO right now. The head of WTO, Roberto Azevedo, is a very good friend of mine, and he's doing everything he can to bring everyone into the tent. And so I really think it will be important. If we want to renegotiate the global trading system, well, let's do that. I know that WTO is very open to it, but it's important that everyone engage with the WTO. And so you know, China's joining of the WTO was an important part of the growth for WTO and the rise of its own influence. Right now, it's going through a difficult period, but my hope is that, again, people will realize that multilateralism is a system that's worked very well for everyone for a very long time, and my great hope is that we can start working things out through the WTO.
President Kim, you work for the World Bank. It is one of the most important international organizations established after the Second World War. It's about multilateralism. But now this debate, how much is it hindering you from doing your job with efficiency?
Well, you know, the good news is that we at the World Bank Group are doing very well. So we had the largest replenishment of our fund for the poorest countries. And China is one of the fastest growing donors. And so it's a reflection on the 40-year anniversary that at first China was a recipient of funds from IDA, our fund for the poorest countries, and now it's one of the fastest growing donors to IDA. So we increased the amount that we can provide by 50%. We're going to be able to provide $45 billion over 3 years in Africa alone. And we just received a capital increase. It was something that many close observers of the World Bank thought that we'd never get. But in the end we did. And so now, compared to the day I walked in to the World Bank group, in a couple of years we're going to be close to 3 times our size. So we're doing very well. But we're very much aware that us doing well is not the point. The entire global economy has to do well. And unfortunately, there are a lot of downside risks right now. So all of us, including the World Bank Group, have cut back on our projections for global growth.
Are you talking about a winter to come?
Well, there are a lot of downside risks, and among them, the business cycle, of course, changes over time. We've been in this particular cycle for now 10 years, but uncertainty is not something that the global economy likes. It's certainly not something that the stock markets like. And what happens in situations of great uncertainty, in the context in which the United States is raising their Fed funds rate, is that it's possible that developing countries will have a very hard time getting access to capital. We've seen this happen before. So we're worried, and we think that the uncertainty around trade and tariffs is going to increase the likelihood of negative events in the global economy. But in the meantime, because we've gotten such a vote of confidence from our governors and our shareholders in the last year, we really want to step up and do everything we can to prepare the developing countries for whatever might happen in the future, to prepare them for the economy of the future, but also do whatever we can to help countries find a way forward and not get stuck in battles in which nobody will win.
There are a lot of questions related to that these days. It's about development as well. For example, the debt related to the Belt and Road Initiative, about financing. What do you make of the discussion going on right now? What do you think should be the nature of the discussion?
Debt is not necessarily a bad thing.
Exactly.
It helps you make investments.
It's just one natural part of the economy.
That's right. It helps you make investments, and then the investments then will help you grow the economy, and as you grow the economy, then you'll have enough income and tax revenue to pay back those debts. That's how the world works. The key is that every country, we're now working with every single country, so they can manage their budget. They're having good fiscal policy where they're not spending money on silly things, but spending money on the things that they absolutely must spend on.
What is the absolutely must spend on list to you?
There's essential infrastructure, of course. You need energy, you need transport. But the other thing that we're really stressing these days is you also have to invest in your people.
Exactly.
The nature of jobs is changing so quickly that the one thing that you know that if you invest in, it'll pay off is in ensuring that your children are not stunted, they're not malnourished as children, they have good education, and then they'll be able to compete in the future economy no matter what that looks like. So essential hard infrastructure, but it's just as importantly, and in many ways more importantly, you've got to invest in your people. And so if you're focused on those kinds of things and not building roads to nowhere or not building projects that may win you votes in the next election, but that may not help you grow the economy, if you're doing those kinds of things, then I think countries can get through this period much more in a way that will not hamper their growth overall. But debt is a real issue, and debt transparency is a real issue. We really now need to move in a direction where we know exactly what countries' debt situation looks like, what the maturity and the interest rate on those loans are, and all the countries together are moving in that direction, and also China. China has signaled a very clear intent of really being much more transparent over time with how much they've been lending and to whom.
There seems to be a lot of discussions about Belt and Road Initiative, which is wonderful. Over the past 5 years, that it is coming from an initiative to real projects. From the World Bank's perspective, how do you see a new initiative from the brainstorming to the initiative stage of implementation to becoming more matured, everybody learn, and eventually become something that everybody can depend on and work together?
Right. Well, I've had the great privilege of being involved in a conversation with the Chinese government from the very beginning, when the idea first came to President Xi's mind, and we began talking with him about it. But then I've also
I also understand the World Bank is also doing some wonderful report about the results so far about the Belt and Road Initiative.
We're looking at the implications of Belt and Road for development as a whole. But then I've also heard directly from countries that are now very worried about, suspicious of the Belt and Road Initiative. And so if we take a step back, the original idea of the Belt and Road Initiative was to improve connectivity. And that's in roads, rails, trade, connectivity in terms of broadband access. These are all really important and really good ideas. There are many countries that think that this is strictly a Chinese initiative. But if you ask President Xi today, I think he will tell you that he always intended for this to be a partnership.
Exactly.
This is what he has told me, anyway. And so we have to find a path forward, because China is too important a development partner for all those countries. And it's too important for China to work in partnership with all these other countries that are now being somewhat critical. Finding a path forward to create the partnership that will be necessary to see a shared vision of connectivity across this entire region. If we can make that happen, it will absolutely be a game changer for those countries. But I think the things that are critical right now are, one, we need to talk so that the countries and the leaders understand each other. I think this notion of BRI as a partnership is one that we really have to get out there much, much more. You know, I think at the end of the day, you know, it's the countries that are part of the Belt and Road Initiative. It's the countries that are in this whole region, which includes Africa now. It's the countries and the poor people living in those areas that we have to think about. And so any nation like China, who's making such a large commitment, we've got to find a way to bring the different parties together, have some kind of shared vision, and then move forward to create opportunity.
That's where the World Bank can play its role,
well,
isn't it? What's going to be the World Bank's role from your perspective? What's going to be that?
Well, we've been very much engaged in helping client countries prepare, and I think things like making sure that environmental and social protections are in place, making sure that things like trade across borders is facilitated, because right now there's huge problems in neighbors trading with each other. So there's lots of opportunity for us to be involved, but I think we need to take another step in developing the notion of BRI and the notion of Chinese participation in development as part of a broader partnership with Europe and the United States and other countries.
Not only China working with the other countries on partnership, whether it's BRI or other platforms, but also President Kim, how China so far has been making sure its promises come true. Recently, I understand the World Bank has put out a report about the business environment in China, particularly regarding small and medium-sized enterprises. Contrary to some of the messages people receive in the media reports, in fact, China is moving up the ladder in terms of its capability and maturity of welcoming and creating environment for business. What exactly is it?
So our Doing Business report we put out every year. And the Doing Business report is very straightforward. It measures the capacity of domestic small and medium enterprises to get a business started. So it's not about trade, it's not about foreign companies, it's about domestic companies and how easy it is for them to get a business started.
But where did you get those information? Coming from the Chinese government?
No. We have an independent group of assessors, and so it's the same group. Many of them are lawyers, but we have groups of independent people who write assessments. And so you can't cheat on this one. I mean, you have to actually make the reforms in order to get the credit and then move up the list. So this year, China moved up from number 78 last year to number 46. So they moved up 32 places, one of the top movers. China made really significant reforms in 7 different areas.
Right.
And so this was one of the most remarkable improvements that we've seen in quite some time, especially for a country this large. India, interestingly, is also improving, and we have been working both with India and China to try to get them to focus on those things which make the most difference in helping small and medium enterprises get started. So this is quite for me anyway, I think an extremely encouraging outcome. China is now 46, which is on the very top of high middle income countries and getting very close to the high income countries in the openness of its environment.
You're watching our special program coming from Shanghai on the first ever Import Expo hosted by China. Our exclusive interview with the World Bank President Jim Yong Kim is not just about the global trade, but also many of the other important issues going on in the world, including the apparent trade war between China and the United States. About that, Mr. Kim is helping us to understand his views of how important this bilateral relationship is for the rest of the international community and what needs to be done from both leadership in the 2 countries in order to make better things happen.
Well, I think that finding paths where countries like China and the United States can come to an agreement. You know, our understanding is that President Xi and President Trump will be meeting in Buenos Aires. I'll be there at the G20 leaders meeting. And
so far the plan is?
Yes, so far the plan is. And our great hope is that based on the personal relationship that the 2 have, that there will be some progress in terms of understanding where we're going to go around the trade dispute. That's our sincere hope. But also, you know, multilateralism is a system that sometimes people forget about in good times. And then in bad times, they rely on us a lot. It happened during the post-2007-2008 crisis, where we were asked to immediately increase our lending. And we're in a very good position to respond. We hope we don't have to. But we still believe that multilateralism is an invention that was so effective in the post-war period for the past 75 years. And every time things get difficult, I think nation states and leaders realize once again just how important institutions like the World Bank Group are.
If you were to be in the same room with the 2 gentlemen you just mentioned, President Trump coming from the U.S. and President Xi coming from China, what would you say to them?
Well, I would say that they're 2 of the most important leaders in the world, and they in fact do have a good personal relationship. And I would simply say to them that based on this personal relationship, based on the fact that what happens in this room is so important, not just to your 2 countries, but to the rest of the world, I have great faith in you that you can find a path forward. That's exactly what I'd say, and then I'd walk out of the room.
Let them to talk to one another.
Right.
That's very smart.
Yeah.
Every time I meet you, I want to have your wisdom about leadership, particularly right now. We see so much negative energy in a way as a result of the challenges we're facing right now worldwide. And many say hope is not the strategy. So if hope certainly is not the strategy, what is, President Kim, the strategy?
Well, I think you always have to have hope. You know, President Obama said something about hope that I wish I had heard earlier in my life. For example, when I started a campaign to bring HIV treatment to Africa, many of my own team members would look at me and say, Jim, you're just giving them false hope. And I didn't know how to answer that. But President Obama, during his campaign, used to say, you know, there's no such thing as false hope. There's just hope. And so let's look at South Korea. Let's look at China in the 1970s. You know, if you read the World Bank reports on South Korea in 1959, the year that I was born, 1962, when I was a 3-year-old, they said that South Korea would not be eligible for a World Bank loan because there's no way they'd be able to pay it back. They thought the South Korean economy is hopeless. That without lots of aid, they're not going to be able to provide their people with even the basic necessities. So they wouldn't give them a loan because they thought it was a hopeless country.
They wouldn't even provide them with any hope.
No loan. No loan, no hope. But then we know what happened in Korea. And if you'd asked the same question in the 60s and 70s of China, I think they'd say something very similar. And then look what happened. So for me, hope is not what you come to on the basis of analysis. Hope is a moral choice. And in a position like mine, if I ever tell you that a country or a group of people is hopeless, you should make sure that I get fired. Because there's no such thing as a country without hope. There's no such thing as a group of people without hope, if people like you and me will do the right thing. The one thing I'd say about leadership is that right now, what I see is a narrowing of the scope of concern for leaders. In other words, leaders are much more now turning to saying, well, I'm going to think about my problem. I'm not going to think about the problem. Right? The problem is climate change in the world. The problem is 8 billion people who by 2025 are going to have access to broadband, have access to smartphones, and their aspirations are going to go through the roof. They're going to want to live like the people they see on their smartphones. That's the problem. And so if you look at the problem, then you have to think about, so what do we need to do to create a sustainable, growing economy that provides opportunities for everyone? If you then turn around and instead say, well, I'm going to only think about the people who vote for me, or I'm only going to think about my country, or even my region, my state, if you think about that, if you think about my problem, then we're going to be in trouble. If everyone's just thinking about their problem, then we're not going to be able to lead to the kinds of solutions we need. We need people who will take the worst problems of the world, put it on their shoulders and say, okay, buck stops with me. I've got to think about how to solve the problem. Now, I have watched very carefully President Xi and Premier Li over the past 6 years, and this is now what I see happening in China. What I see happening in China is they're realizing, the leaders are realizing, that because there's such an important economy in the world, because there's such an important power in the world, they've got to now start thinking about the problem. It's becoming their responsibility. And so the one message I would give to leaders is you have to be the one. Every single one of you have to be the one who says, I'm not going to just think about my problem, I'm going to think about the problem.
It's a learning curve for everyone, but with hope in the heart. Thank you so much, President Kim, for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me, Wei.